Hello, welcome to What Writers Should Know, a educational bit of information provided by Horsemen Publications. Again, for those watching, this is just our advice. You find what works for you. But we've done this for a little bit. I'm author Erica Lance. I am also the founder and CEO of Four Horsemen Publications. And with me today is my co-founder and also an amazing author, Valerie Willis. Hello,
Hey,
Val.
everybody. I'm so excited to share research. We're talking about research, my favorite.
I know this is, I'm going to have to be careful to keep you under control on this topic.
I know. And I only could talk about a tiny snippet. But if you're looking for like everything, I dig my fingers into research. There's Bane research
Do you have a copy of it? Can you show everybody?
Oh, I do. I keep.
Oh, see, she look how unready she is for this. This is called impromptu story things. But this is Writer's Bane research. You can get it in a hardcover or softcover. The links in the show notes. But it's something that you can utilize to understand how to research. So I think what you're talking about today is how to write legends, right?
Yeah. I want to talk about characters in particular.
Okay.
Which I think a lot of people think that their characters have to be completely fictionalized, crafted from fresh, right? And that's not necessarily true. And sometimes you can add and tweak. And even then, when they're inspired by something, sometimes authors are afraid to break out of the norm or break out of the truth they've sort of seeded into their character. But there's so many layers to a character in general. So this also works for character creation in general. So what I like to break down in my characters, any kind of history, any kind of mythology or folklore or legend kind of stuff that I want to tie to them. I sometimes look at people and public figures, people I know. Art and other creative work can be very inspiring, because we have all of this amazing Greek mythology art that kind of gives us these visionary kind of aspects. Sometimes your characters can be influenced by the objects that you want them to be related to. We see this a lot with steampunk, right? Where they're going to be an airship or Captain Nemo and the Nautilus. Like those are very important things. A lot of people like to tie animals to their characters. Lady Hawk is a great movie that is very strongly rooted with her turning into the hawk and I believe he turns into the wolf, right?
Yeah, and they're on different cycles, so they never can be together because they're hurt.
So good.
Gotta love Rutger Hauer.
I know.
So let's talk about when you formulate a character, because when you're writing a story, even a short story, we always talk about that glacier of information that right? And should know your character's back history, its pluses, its minuses, it's all the sort of little tweaks. And you don't, depending on the side of the story, you have to necessarily know everything, but it does influence how that story is laid out or how that character reacts, right?
Right. And one of the last veins of a character that you should always be aware of is their medical and mental state in history, right?
Oh, wow.
So, and I think that's like one of the biggest missed points, because I may not be showcasing this might be a secondary character, right? This might be just the best friend of the main character. But if his parents and family died in a fire, every time a fire or a similar situation or fire magic's in or whatever the scenario and genre you're writing, right? That character should be reacting on some level, right?
Yeah.
Or have unusual knowledge because of his history with that thing. And that's sort of, either they're over prepared or well prepared, or they fall apart, is usually sort of the hardline dynamics of something like that. Yeah. And that's why I think it's important to understand what your character's role is and what type of research that character requires. And like you were saying, it doesn't necessarily go into the story. It's more for you to be aware of as you write that character to know their background, right?
Yeah.
I know you're a big fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but early on we knew something was weird and different about Angel, for instance. And as that back history is slowly brought to the forefront, we realize, oh, spoiler alert if you have not gotten around to this 90s TV show, he has his soul, and then, what makes him all the different things, right? So it's very important for a writer to always be aware of those different aspects of where they're pulling their inspiration from the character, but also what kind of history they're building, because when they put them into the sandbox, so to speak, you need to make sure that their knowledge matches.
Yeah.
I've seen it where, because I was just mentioning animals, I've seen it where someone has labeled, oh, the because I used to do developmental edits for story breakdown and character breakdown. I go, hey, why'd you choose this character to go by the horses? Oh, because he knows horses. I said, nothing that he does and says to this merchant says he knows horses. I said, did you know you can YouTube video how to pick or age a horse at an auction? And she's like, what? I said, I want you to watch these videos and then revisit the scene and rewrite it with that knowledge, because that's the knowledge your character has just approached the situation in. Like,
Wow.
it makes a difference. It's like an Outlander that he's a groomsman and he's obsessed with horses. And you can tell because in every scene that there's a horse, even when he's having a serious conversation, he gets easily distracted and starts checking the horses and stuff, right? And I love that aspect. And that's a great example of making sure, if you're going to correlate a character with an expertise or with something that they enjoy, that should show anytime they encounter or you introduce a scene with those things. It's almost like the Cherkov gun. If you introduce a gun, that gun better fire by Act 3. That's just how it is.
I like how you said that's just how it is. The gun
That's just how it
needs
is.
to
That's
fire.
just how. Just no.
So
Just everything
let's talk
matters.
a little bit about that, because I think like people don't take enough time when they say the characters from New York or the characters from Boston or the characters from New Mexico. I think there's a little bit that people don't research to go, what does that mean? How do they potentially say things? So what do you recommend there? Like if I want to have a Bostonian character, right? They probably say things differently than I would, not horribly differently where you don't understand. I'm not saying they're French versus American, for instance, but there is a little bit. How do you recommend somebody be able to have that character have a Southern twang, or how they say
or have
things?
tendencies or behaviors that reflect that, right? That
Yeah.
culture. And that goes to people watching. If you know someone from there, start talking to them. Say, hey, what's something that you do that you feel screams Boston, or things that you do that only people from Boston do, or things like that. But the cool thing is that because we're in the age of the internet, finding articles of top 10 things that only Bostoners would know or understand, that is a common topic, right? And you can insert Boston with European, American, Floridians, like, we can easily, everyone knows, and that say, what makes someone a Florida man, or top 10 things only Florida men do. And you're going to get article after article after article of different people's opinions. You will even get forums and Reddits on people talking about, oh, my aunt was from Boston, and this is how I definitely know, because she used to cook a certain thing, like tapioca is a very Minnesota thing. Right?
Yeah.
And there was this, oh God, it was a movie with Sandra Bullock, and she had to go to Minnesota because she had been demoted or something, and they kept offering her tapioca, and she was losing her shit around every corner, because she's like, why the tapioca? But that was because they put her in that scenario, and someone had at least experienced enough of that Minnesota vibe to put those things in there. In fact, one of our authors just wrote a Minnesota-based book about
Yeah,
that culture. And
grabbing a slice of Minnesota nice.
yes.
And it's true because I was born in Minnesota. So when I get anywhere near my parents up there, my husband loves to joke with me because I'm like, don't you know my accent comes in and they talk a lot like this and they want to put stuff in a bag and maybe have a brewski and things. And oh, bless your heart. I'm like, oh my gosh.
And it's funny because you have that phrase, bless your heart, and you take that into different regions of just America, and it changes the meaning of that. Of course, we always talk here in the South. That's how that's our polite insult. Oh, bless your heart. And you're in trouble. That whatever you said and did, you've just been down, you dropped a notch in everyone's eyes. It's like, oh.
Exactly.
He just had to tie a bone around his neck just to get the dog to play with him. And we have weird phrasings like that, right?
So you recommend like sort of doing a search and looking for it, right?
Yeah, like don't feel that you have to kind of magically visit in this economy. You don't have to travel to a place to really gather that information. I think one of the best examples I have is in the Oracle. There's a whole scene where they're in Delphi, Greece. They're staying at a particular hotel. They go to a certain cafe and then they sneak into the temple. And I describe the street and the angles and everything. And I read it at an open mic. And when I got done with the open mic, a gentleman pulled me to the side. He goes, "Oh my God, I know exactly what you're talking about. I lived in Delphi, Greece. When did you live in Delphi?" And I'm like, I've never been out of Florida. Right. So, and I've even ghostwritten stuff in other countries for those audiences. I've written Indian romances and seen the reviews where they're like, it was like I was standing in, I go to that train station for work. I know exactly where they were talking. And that's because I use that little Google drop dude everywhere.
Oh my gosh.
I also Googled, especially for the Indian romance, top 10 places to take your date and started looking for Indian based websites that listed those places. And it's a very different, and that's something else to be aware of. If you want a local thing, make sure you're pulling from local papers on those topics. And the list changes quite a bit. And the way they talk about those places is more intimate. And then once you have that list, dive into their websites, dive into the Google photos and maps and reviews, see what people are saying and doing about those places. But set yourself a timer too, and a limit of what you need. Don't start researching 3 other places just in case. No, focus on the one that you intend them to be at. If you find a better place, then abandon that research and go to the next vein of research that you prefer to have in its place. Don't try to research and gather multiple aspects for your characters at the same time, because you're going to break yourself and break your characters and break your story that way. And that's another pitfall, I think, of research, is people are like, oh, but this one seems cooler, let me gather info on both. And it's like, no, pick one.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Focus one character at a time, and you don't have to research prior to writing that character. The moment you make the decision, and this is why drafts and revisions are so vital. For example, the one I was talking about, this character is going to be our horse expert. Well, now from that point backwards in your revisions, be sure that you have that new information in mind for your revisions and just slightly tweak his behavior to react and impact appropriately. So as you build up your characters, that's where your revision process also comes in mind. Don't try to edit as you write. Get the story out first. Discover who your characters are fully by the end of that first draft, and then apply those character aspects and research on your revision rounds.
It makes sense, and it ties into part of the world building too, and keeping track of what characters know. And if it, here's something I tell people: it is really easy to go down a research superhighway and then
Mm.
get lost in that whole research. I tease you all the time because there are sometimes you go down and you're like, I didn't know this, and I didn't know this, and I'm like, you were just getting what the scarf was made out of. Like, what are you doing? Right. And then you're like, did you know they used, peacock feathers to do? And I'm like, like, that's not what you're doing. So one thing I can also recommend is if you need to put a little comment in your manuscript. Bob needs to know where the coffee came from, right? He doesn't have to know it right that second necessarily, especially if it's a smaller thing, unless whatever you're going to say is going to impact the trajectory of something. But if it's just a piece of knowledge or whatever, like research how to tell if it's a good horse, because it's that whole saying: never look a gift horse in the mouth, right? The reason is because if their teeth are all bad and everything, it's not a good horse.
Old
So,
horse.
but don't get yourself so wrapped up in doing the research at that time that you stop writing if you can. Like, go back, note it, but then track it per what you're saying to go back and do revisions. And how does that affect, but they're a horse expert, but why are they a horse expert, right?
Yeah, there's a history there, right? It might be part of their culture. Maybe he comes from a tribe or a city that's, notorious. For example, when I mentioned to a coworker the other day, I live in Ocala, they go, oh man, you must be really into horses based off of my location, right? And I'm like, well, no, but it is always fun that at every red light just about in this town, I have a horse staring at me in the tree at the red light. Like, oi. The kids love it. They get to see horses all the time in traffic. It's horse trailers everywhere. But that's a great example, though, right? Where environment is impacted and then the characters are impacted, right? Because of, that's great that you assume I love horses because of where I live, but what if this person absolutely hates it, so it's like a nightmare wherever they go. It can change how you tell the story, how that character interacts with your story and your readers even. I tell people all the time, make do and don't list. I do that often. Roma Santa is probably one of my best characters that has the most research packed into him. He is a hodgepodge of mythology and history and animals and all those things because he's a werewolf. There was so much to pull from, but I didn't want pop culture. I didn't want lore inspired by the Beast of Gaston. I'm gonna hash it, but the Beast, the French werewolf incident. There we go. I didn't want him allergic to silver. I didn't want him to always change at the full moon or any of these more pop culture aspects. And I wanted it more of a skin changer, and I wanted 12th century or older belief systems. And then I discovered, oh, well, I want him, at one point, the earlier variants of the Greek Apollo is associated with wolves. Oh man, the Celtic Apollo was also associated with wolves. How do I, combine these into the character? And just kept building from there, right? And then I had sort of a do list with little cliff notes, not deep research, just enough to get the info I wanted. Even his name, Roma Santa, is derived from a famous serial killer he was one of the first serial killers to stand trial in history. And they're like, are you guilty or not guilty? And he goes, guilty. And they said, why? And he's like, well, I'm a werewolf. I had to eat. And it's like, like that's the character I wanted. I wanted that very bluntness to him, farmer backwoods kind of vibes to him, despite everything that he was involved in. So, but because of who he was, he mentally broke down the fastest out of all the characters I've created in the Cedric series. Every time he saw something he's done at this timeline, and then he sees the impact years or centuries later, he just fall apart, like
Well,
guilt.
I think that's awesome, and tracking that is important. I have a
Oh, yeah.
question though, a lot of people might have is, you know, a lot of, especially new writers and stuff, when you're writing to trends, right? You have different characters that have different, what do you say to people when you're writing that, you know, angsty heroine or something like that, that everybody else has already written before?
Don't be afraid to be tropey. It's like Hallmark sells. Hallmark has an entire month now. And now it's almost like 2 months worth of Hallmark push between November and December. Readers do like tropes. They like archetypes. They like knowing that I tell people all the time, I write broody, angsty boys. If you like broody, angsty, self-loathing or flawed characters, that's what you're going to get. What makes them different is they're based off of their hodgepodge of mythology and alt history, vibe. Their story is different. There's no clear lines of villain and hero in this world. They're all immortals, but they're stumbling over themselves. So you'll feel better about yourself because, like, if this person with all the power can't get their shit together on this front, or their love life together, then clearly I'm okay. Right? I like that aspect, but know that that's okay. It's okay. Hey, I wrote a mafia romance and it's got a very possessive male and it's got a very submissive female, and that's okay. But you can also, but I think that's where the difference comes, right? You
Yeah.
got to tell them what your duo or your lineup is, right? And how they are tied to the story. So when I sell Cedric, it is, hey, broody, angsty boys, each book inspired by different vein of mythology and history, and they're just horribly flawed, and everything's morally gray, with romance in the back seat, adventure fantasy vibes in the front, with some dark tones.
Yeah.
It gets gory. There's a lot of monster battles, and people are like, oh, sure. And it sounds generic to me, but to my readers it sounds very different, right? That's like checking off boxes of, oh, I like these things. There's a lot of things that I'm intrigued about. Let me see how they told this story with these same tropes. Because none of us will tell a story the same way twice. I mean, look how many times Cinderella and the hero's journey has been regurgitated, and it's different every time, but it's also the same at the same time. Same thing with, and then they want to ask about my male romance. Runaway vampire prince falls in love with human priest, and now they're trying to save the world together.
Wow.
So we've had runaway princes and things like that. We've had taboo love with priest and other elements. Those are very common archetypes or tropes, but they're going to pick up that book and realize it has a French vibe. It has sort of it feels like alt history, but it's not. It's going to have a low fantasy vibe, but with dark elements, and it's the writing that's going to tell the difference.
Absolutely. Okay, so we got to wrap up here. Show the book again where people can go down this rabbit hole
or stay out of the rabbit hole.
And you have Writer's Bane formatting. We'll be doing some more on research and stuff.
Yes.
You can take notes, all kinds of things. It's a beautiful book, and you can get a paperback hardcover. Mm-hmm. I think you have another Writer's Bane coming out later this year, but we'll talk about that later.
Writing a number 101.
Yes. So, final words, Valerie. Final words.
Final words.
Set a timer. A legend.
Set a timer. Try not to spend too much time on research. It's important, but don't lose your pacing writing is important. Get the story out. 2, focus one character and one aspect at a time. Do not try to do it all at the same time. And 3, make yourself a do and don't list. And the moment you're on that don't list, you abandon the research. because you've now strayed too far. Sometimes knowing where that line is can make the world a difference, so you're not frustrated with your research.
I love that. I love that. And you have inspired me a lot through the years on the research, making me actually deep dive on characters, because it's something that I think as an author, I just want to be like, that person's from Boston. But you've made me see that in order for people to get even more immersed in what you're doing, you need to fill out the character. You need to fill out that iceberg, even if you're the only one that knows it, because it will reflect in those stories, and people will see that Roma Santa gets heartsick over what's happening. And it can be one line, one sentence, but you feel that deepness of the character when you're reading it instead of surface fluff. So thank you, Valerie, for your how to write characters like a pro in writing legends. Where can people find you if they want to stalk you online?
WillisAuthor.com has links everywhere, but for the most part, whether you're going to Instagram, TikTok, anywhere online, you're going to find Willis Author is my most common username. I think X, it's Valerie_Willis was the only one I couldn't get that on. And you should be able to find me and all my links on my website, as well as signed copies of books and my crazy little earrings and things like that.
Wonderful, wonderful. And everybody should have crazy little earrings. So, writers out there, this is more of what you should know. You could always check out Four Horsemen Publications and Accomplishing Innovation Press. The links are in the show notes. And we will see you next week. Don't forget, keep writing.